Hi guys, it's Bob here from Ramon and Bob's The Guitar Show. First video being done from lockdown, so my circumstances here have changed slightly. First of all, Ramon and I can't both be in the video together, but we talk pretty constantly, and we're putting this video together as part of the series he's been doing on the Beatles and their songs and their gear, because I have a few guitars in my collection that hit some of those spots, and I'd like to share them with you. The sharp-eyed of you might have noticed that my backdrop is more or less the same, a little bit different. That's because I'm now living in my guitar room, which has become a sitting room, whilst we have building work done to the house, but of course the building works had to stop because of coronavirus. So we're living without a living room and a dining room and without a kitchen, which is a bit of a challenge. So if I'm looking a bit thinner and a bit pasty, that's because I'm undernourished. Okay, let's go. Okay, so first up, this is a Beatles related guitar. It's not really a Beatles guitar proper, because this is the guitar that was played by Sutcliffe when he was the original bass player in the band way back in the early Cavern days. It's a Hofner. This one's from 1959. The designation is a 500/5. It's not a president or a senator bass, it's a 500/5. You've got volume control for each pickup here, switch for each pickup, switch it in and out, and then a rhythm and solo setting, which basically is just an attenuator, it just makes it quieter. Mono jack on the corner, two single coil Hofner pickups. An interesting detail on the guitar is that the intonation in the archtop bridge is done by tiny pieces of fret wire put into slots. So you've got 4 different positions on option for each string. Tortoiseshell pickguard, all original, flower inlay, dots on the neck, really big, clubby C-shaped neck. Quite a handful, quite thick, not very wide but quite deep. Fantastic piece of flame on the back of the guitar. You might not be able to see it from that distance, but the flame maple on the side and back of this guitar are amazing. It's virtually mint for a 1959. This used to belong to my father, who played it as a baritone guitar. So he played it with guitar strings because he had quite big hands, and he used to play those songs where you change the chord with every beat and a kind of shuffling on the left hand. So he used to use it for that, but then I inherited it and made sure it was well looked after. It's had a neck reset because the hide on these things often goes, but apart from that it's completely intact, and it's got that typical really thumpy, bassy sound. Some of my friends tell me that these things are really popular in studios for that kind of old school retro sound, but you can imagine the McCartney sound thumping away on this with a violin bass, but similar kind of sound in the Beatles. So that's item number 1. Flat wound strings, obviously, as you would have had from the period, but that's item number 1. Let's move on to the next one. Okay guys, second up, we have a 1956 Gretsch Duojet. Similar, though not identical to the one that George Harrison played. This one's a hard tail. They also used to offer them with a fixed arm Bigsby, which is a bit of a handful when you have to put it in the case because the fixed arm sticks up a bit, but they have a really interesting sound, those fixed arm Bigby's. If you just move the arm very slightly, the sound really moves with your hand. They're really nice, really nice. But this is a hardtail. In those days, production numbers were tiny, and virtually every batch was slightly different. And every time Gretsch produced a new year, at least, if not a batch of these things, the specs changed. So this is the second spec. The first spec would have had the curly Gretsch logo on the end, whereas this has got the more modern rectangular logo. But this has got the original Diamond single coil pickups, it's got the milliliter bridge, it's got the large block inlays. So this is the second generation Duojet. I think that George's was the third generation, which had hump block inlays, and it may even have had Filtertron humbuckers. I'm not sure. But this is pretty much as close as you get, and of course all the sound in this guitar, all the sound of it really is in the middle. It's mainly in the country twang Things like that. But this would have been very similar to the guitar that George would have been playing in the earlier part of his career with the Beatles, before he moved on to the bigger-bodied semi-acoustic Gretches like the Country Gentleman and stuff. So there you go, 1956 Gretsch Duojet, in pretty good condition. Show you the back, hardly a scratch mark on it, all original. I dare say, like the Hofner, most Gretches of this age by now have had a neck reset. I go back with this guitar about 10 or 12 years, but I can't vouch for its history before that, and I'm pretty sure that this guy would have needed some work done on him in his life. An interesting story for you, a few years ago, when I bought the guitar, the Melita Bridge, which is like everything Gretsch, over-engineered metal, the Melita Bridge was in some danger of cracking. And I lent it to a friend for a week, and of course it came back and the bridge had dropped and cracked. And he was beside himself, and I said, no man, it's all right. It was going to go anyway. So I then had to find a new silver 1950s Gretsch Melita Bridge. They are not easy to find. I got very lucky. The guy on eBay had one, but he didn't have any of the intonation saddles. He just had the chassis itself. And I said, man, that's perfect, because that's the bit of mine that's gone. I've got everything else. So as a result, I didn't pay too much money for it. I think it was about 180 bucks, which is still mad money for a small piece of metal, but it's what vintage stuff costs. And these days, you'd probably have to pay 500 bucks for a Melita Bridge. So I got lucky. So the guitar is restored to it's definitely very excellent condition. It's not quite mint. Original frets, lovely neck, and plays quite fast. I've even taken it out on a blues gig occasionally. It even works at that. So there you go. A 56 Gretsch Duojet. Okay, third up is a sound that transformed the Beatles sound, the Rickenbacker 12-string. George Harrison got his first 360-12, which is the same model as this is, slightly different shape, slightly different generation. He got his in 1963, I think the second one came along in 65. The first one very definitely had pointed arches. It had binding on the front as well as the back. It had the toaster pickups. It had the 6+6 really clever peg head, these things do, and of course it had the Rick sound. This one is a 1968, and this is what they call Jet Glow, which is black, but it's a factory refinish from original. It was probably a failed fire glow, because if you rub underneath it, some here and here, there are little ding marks, and there is a fire glow red sunburst underneath. This one obviously didn't pass the cut when it went to quality control on exiting the production line, so they sent it back and it was resprayed black. But the finish has been on here for so long, it feels like it's an original part of the guitar. Again, great condition, no buckle rash on the back, clean neck. Like all guitars of this era, Gibson and Fender and Rickenbacker necks were all getting skinny, so here you've got 12 strings and quite a narrow neck. So for someone with slightly big fingers like me, it's a little bit of a handful, but it's got the sound, not just the sound for the Beatles, but the sound for all your prog that came later. You know, I like playing sort of Genesis type stuff on it. Things like that. These guitars are probably the best electric 12 strings ever made. These and probably the Fender, which is coming up in value too. But these things are supreme, and of course they sound fantastic if you can do it through two amplifiers with the Rico sound stereo as well. So there you have it. A pretty fab condition 1968 Rickenbacker 360-12. And finally, last up is an Epiphone. This one's from 1965. It's an Epiphone Texan, which is a round-shouldered Gibson Dreadnought, really, but with the Epiphone badge on it, because of course by then Epiphone and Gibson were both being made alongside each other at the Kalamazoo Gibson factory. So it's a very light guitar. It's in fantastic condition. No issues. Quite often the top cracks. There's no issues like that. It's got the original adjustable ceramic bridge, which some people say sucks tone, but it's fine with me. It's got the classic Epiphone parallelogram inlays, single parallelograms, clues and tuning heads. It's in very, very good shape. Again, very clean, no dings, no problems with it at all. And it's got a pretty good tone. Chucks it out, it's a fair amount of volume. It's quite quick to play. The guitars, as I said earlier, the guitars around this time were transitioning in terms of shape. They felt that people wanted to have a skinnier neck because it felt faster to play, and so all the strings gradually went together, so that the nut width went from 1 5/8 to 1 9/16, which is only a 1/16 of an inch difference, but if you play the guitar you'll know what an enormous difference a tiny amount makes under your hand. This guitar is in the transition year where they went towards that, so this guitar hasn't gone really narrow like the ones from later 65 and 66, but it isn't as wide and flat as the ones from 64 either, but it's still playable, which is why I bought it. The other reason I bought it is because one of my heroes growing up, being a Brit, one of my heroes was a folk singer called Al Stewart, and if you could get past his rather twangy voice, a bit like mine, you got A, some fantastic songs, B, some amazing, amazing musicians playing on his albums. His second album, Love Chronicles, had Jimmy Page playing sessions on it, and Jimmy Page played for him again on his third album, Zero She Flies. By the time he got into his hit-making phase later with Year of the Cat, he had people like Pete Woods and Tim Rennick, the fabulous Tim Rennick, playing electric guitar for him, and a host of incredible session musicians who play on his albums. And he was also produced by Alan Parsons, so the sound of the records is absolutely sublime. Of course, there's a link to the Beatles theme in this video because Alan Parsons was also involved in some of the later Beatles sessions. So this is, as I say, a 1965 Epiphone Texan. I think the designation is FT79, yeah, it's an FT79, that's the model number, in pretty immaculate condition. And this is an acoustic guitar I use quite a lot. I use my Taylor for regular gigs because it's electrified. I use this one when I'm recording or doing acoustic stuff. The only watch out is the way it's arranged. The strings lie quite low onto the top, which is no problem when you're playing acoustically, but some in-saddle pickups stick up a bit and this chokes. So it's a difficult guitar to put a sound hole pickup into. But that aside, it records nicely, mics up. I hope it's miking up well today. And as I say, this is the fourth one. The reason it's here, by the way, I should have said that in the first place, sorry, is because this is pretty much identical to the guitar that Paul would have composed yesterday on. He probably might have recorded Blackbird on it, things like that. So this was definitely a Paul McCartney guitar, although of course you'd be looking at it like that if it was. So there you go, that's the fourth of my Beatles relevant guitars for you today. I hope you're keeping well. I hope you're managing to stay safe in this awful period of lockdown, wherever you are, and that we can soon get back out to play. But for the moment, stay inside and stay with your social distancing. Cheers for now. Bye.